At this time, I would like to call on Matthew Greller to testify. After Matthew Greller, we will have Alex Rich and Doug Murdoch. Matthew, you can go ahead as soon as the sergeant's call time.
Your time will begin.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Eugene and members of the committee. My name is Matt Greller, and I'm an attorney and a lobbyist here on behalf of a client, NATO Theater Owners of New York State. In New York City, NATO represents over 30 movie theaters across the 5 boroughs. Let me be very clear. The movie theaters are still suffering from this terrible pandemic. The theaters want all patrons to feel safe and return to the theaters, which is still the best place to see a movie. Of course, this includes members of the deaf and hard of hearing community. We want members of the deaf and hard of hearing community and others that might benefit from increased open caption showtimes to feel welcome at the cinema. At the same time, however, we oppose Intro 2020 for 3 main reasons, which I describe in further detail in our written testimony. First, this bill will be damaging economically for the movie theaters. Theaters are already trying to recover from being decimated by the pandemic, and experience and data show that audiences that are not deaf and hard of hearing do not like open captioning and either request refunds or they stay home. A recent survey estimated that 49% of the audience that has not returned since the pandemic started. We do not need another reason for patrons to stay home, especially with competition from streaming services. Second, this bill is unnecessary. Theaters are already providing open caption showtimes voluntarily and offer additional open caption showtimes upon request. One major circuit is currently running an expanded open caption pilot in 3 of the busiest theaters in the city. The theaters are also exploring ways to improve the closed captioning experience with new technology to make all patrons feel welcome, comfortable, and included. Theaters can and should do better on open captioning, but we do not need a legislative mandate to do so. Third, this bill is impractical. It far exceeds existing demand, and the 50% mandate between peak and non-peak showtimes cannot mathematically be met. Even Dr. Strange, using the time stone, could not figure out a way to play more open caption showtimes than there actually is time. This bill is too convoluted with its ban on overlapping films, awkward start and end times that don't fit for most 2-hour films, and the excessive 50% mandate. Simply put, Intro 2020 is unworkable. Lastly, there's a concern about the timing of this bill. When it was first introduced, theaters were still ordered closed by the governor. At the time, we reached out to all sponsors to see if we could engage with constituents to address concerns. The bill was bad timing when it was introduced then, and respectfully, this hearing is bad timing now. Please allow the advocates in the theaters to continue their productive discussions to find a win-win solution for expanding open captioning. Such a solution will be based on common sense and data, and not an inflexible mandate that will only kick the movie theaters when they are down. There should not be a rush on this bill just because it is December. The best way to get things right is to allow stakeholders to achieve a voluntary and dynamic solution and not just a legislative mandate. If this bill is implemented, there may not be movie theaters left to show open caption movies or any movies at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Chairman Eugene and members of the Committee on Civil and Human Rights, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Alex Rich, and I work for the National Association of Theater Owners, a trade association representing the exhibition industry. Movie theaters have been deeply impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. In New York City, theaters were required to close for 50 weeks, and when allowed to reopen, faced capacity restrictions that made breaking even, let alone turning a profit, nearly impossible. With theaters closed or operating at reduced capacity, major studios delayed releasing new films or moved them to streaming services, which prolonged the economic impact of the shutdown since theaters had no new product to play when they welcomed back moviegoers. Despite zero income during this period, theaters continued to face mounting fixed costs such as taxes, rent, and city inspection fees. For instance, while the city theaters were still closed as per then Governor Cuomo's executive order, one company still had to pay for elevator and escalator inspections despite having no patrons at a cost of $92,000. At the same time, the majority of New York City theaters received no financial assistance from the federal, state, or municipal governments. It will be a long road to recovery for the exhibition industry. As Hollywood begins to release new films, audiences are slowly coming back to see blockbusters on the big screen, but the industry is far from the record-breaking years it enjoyed pre-pandemic. For instance, this past Thanksgiving weekend, box office was down 46% compared to the same time frame in 2019. Further, new research shows that 49% of consumers who attended movies pre-pandemic are no longer doing so. While theaters remain confident that most of these consumers will return to their auditoriums, it will continue to take time. Simply put, the exhibition industry is still facing an existential crisis that threatens the job security of theater employees and the businesses that rely on robust moviegoing to remain profitable. Any mandate that will further dampen customers' enthusiasm for the theatrical experience could force theaters in New York City to close permanently. We believe the requirements of this bill will exacerbate the difficult economic conditions facing theaters by subjecting them to further financial losses. And this issue is not just about movie theaters. According to an Ernst & Young study commissioned by NATO, movie night spending in other businesses in the US amounted to $5 billion in 2019 before the pandemic hit. New York City restaurants, retail stores, and other businesses will continue to suffer without the customers attracted by movie theaters. As an industry, we remain committed to expanding access to all moviegoers. Later, you'll hear about the steps our industry has taken to ensure every movie at any time has access through the use of captioning devices. You will also hear about voluntary open caption programs being rolled out by companies across the country. I look forward to answering any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Community Chairman Eugene and members of the committee. I am Doug Murdoch, Executive Director of Mid-Atlantic NATO, a regional affiliate of the National Association of Theater Owners. I'm here to speak in opposition to IND 2020 open captioning at motion picture theaters. While the impact of open captioning and the nature of the proposed bill will be addressed by my other theater colleagues, I would like to comment on the unworkable parameters of the bill. As you know, the bill calls for certain movie theaters to provide open captioning for at least half of the showings of each movie per week. On the surface, that sounds like a simple equation, but not when you try to apply it to the real showtimes in a movie theater. So let's take a look at a typical showtime schedule for a 2-hour movie with 15 minutes of previews and a 30-minute intermission. Now, the bill does not define what a week would be, but for this example, we're going to use Friday through Thursday. Now, as illustrated in this snapshot, and is also what I submitted in my testimony, the film would play about 5 shows per day, giving us 35 shows a week. Now, according to the bill, at least 50% of those 35 would have to play in open captioning. That's 18 open captions per week. But then the bill goes further and says that at least half of open caption showings would have to be played during designated peak movie attendance hours, defined as a motion picture that begins after 5:59 p.m. and finishing before 11:01 p.m. on a Friday, or a showing that begins after 11:59 a.m. and finishing before 11:01 on a Saturday or Sunday. For this example, I highlighted in the showtimes that would fit into those designated time periods. The problem is there are only 7 showtimes, but the bill would require 9. Again, 18 of the 35 would have to play open caption, and at least half of that would be 9. There's simply not enough time in the day to comply. The bill then goes on further to say that at least half of the scheduled showings that are scheduled outside of that peak period shall start after 5:59 p.m. and finish before 11:01 p.m. on the weeknights. For this example, I have highlighted in blue the showtimes that would fit into that time period. So half of 9 would be 5.
Time expired.
2, but you end up, it simply doesn't work. The math just simply doesn't work. And for that reason, I urge the committee not to approve this bill. I thank you for the time to speak, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Okay, a bit of a schoolboy error, apologies. So good afternoon, Chairman Eugene and members of the committee. My name's Andy Stone, and I am the Regional Director for Regal Entertainment. So as you've heard, the impact of COVID meant that movie theatres were one of the last businesses to reopen across New York City. You can imagine Regal Entertainment has been significantly impacted by the financial losses that were caused. And furthermore, we continue to incur costs during our extended period of closure, which really has compounded the issue. Now, since we've reopened, we've not seen admissions return to pre-pandemic levels. And that includes audiences who do and don't have hearing problems. It's audience per se. Now, as a business, there are times where we've even had to curtail our operating hours because of the lack of admissions coming in through our doors. Now, like all businesses, we want to welcome all audiences, including the deaf and hard of hearing, back to the movie. As a business, we screen blockbusters through to small independent, as well as foreign films with subtitles. So we embrace all elements and all markets. Catering for all audiences and rebuilding consumer confidence in our business is therefore integral, and we don't want to alienate anybody. Now, we've worked collaboratively with New York City, and we ensure that we've adhered to the COVID operating guidelines and supported Mayor de Blasio's Vax to the Movies campaign. Since we've reopened, we've continued to screen our open caption shows, and across New York City, we've screened 318 showtimes. These showtimes have been for different films on different days and at different times. And as John Waldo alluded to, you know, our average attendee per show was 8. But if you look at the occupancy level for these shows, it's as low as 5%, which means there's nearly 95% of the seats unsold in that particular auditoria. Now, besides specific open caption shows, we also have what we sell as watch parties. This facility gives all customers the opportunity to hire a screen, whether it's for a party, group, or special occasion. And again, just like any other audience, this facility will give those who may be deaf or hard of hearing the opportunity to watch a movie in private at a time which suits them. Now, although I don't have specific data, cinema managers do report back that a significant number of customers who do not have hearing difficulty but attend an open caption film will ask for a refund. And this does contribute to a further financial loss to the business.
Time expired.
Okay. And finally, I would also like you to just look at cinemas not as a solace, but instead look at cinemas as a cumulative. As like any other audience making their decision on wanting to go and watch a film, different cinemas will have different open caption times on different days. This means the consumer has a wide choice of where and when she will be able to watch their open caption movie. Thank you for your time.
Pippi,
Okay, there we go. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank the chair and the committee for allowing me to testify today. My name is Raymond Smith. I am a consultant with the National Association of Theater Owners. I have been engaged in ensuring and enhancing access to movie theaters for all consumers for about 30 years, and in particular, this issue of captioning has been front and center for a considerable period of time. While we support the intent behind this legislation, we do not support the mandate and one size fits all. And we do support continuation of our collaborative efforts in relationship with the deaf and hard of hearing community, which has been going on for years and years. In the 90s, we met with members of the community and were told they wanted more open caption films. We immediately lobbied the film studios successfully to get more product and continue to do so until actually always continue to do so. But in the mid 2000s, a new personal captioning technology came on the market. So we once again engaged with our partners in the deaf and hard of hearing community and learned that they were very excited about personal captioning and the access it provided, but did not like that particular technology. So the industry went out and found manufacturers that were willing to design and develop these technologies, and then continued to have a series of symposiums where we invited members of the deaf and hard of hearing community to come test the product and provide direct feedback to the manufacturers. All these efforts led to the industry investing millions of dollars in 2012, rolling out these technologies across the country. This effort was widely hailed by the deaf and hard of hearing community, and also widely supported by the industry. And the units were widely utilized then as they are today. This all occurred years before the Department of Justice proposed their final regulations on personal captioning. And even then, when they were proposed, once again, the industry engaged with our partners in the deaf individuals in the deaf and hard of hearing community and provided guidance to the Department of Justice, which was mostly accepted and incorporated in the final regulations. Along those same lines, we continue to push for more open captioning programming across the country amongst our members. And in the last couple of years, we've been doing some pilot programs. And while those pilot programs haven't answered all the questions, they did answer one specifically, and that is a one-size-fits-all approach simply doesn't work. It doesn't reflect the realities or nuances of any particular theater or the needs of any particular market or community. So we would suggest and implore that when you reject this legislation, instead allow the people that have ongoing over the years and collaborated to come up with mutually beneficial solutions to continue those efforts, which are ongoing today. Thank you, and I'm welcome to take any questions.
I'd like to just quickly thank the chairman and members of the committee for providing the opportunity to testify. My name is Bob Sunshine. I'm the executive director of the National Association of Theater Owners of New York State. And we represent most of the theaters in New York City. I'm not going to read my testimony because of so many things I've heard today. But I do want to emphasize, we are not the enemy. Again, I say it, we are not the enemy. We're not opposed to open captioning. We actually want to provide more open captioning where it would work for both the community and where it would work for the theater owners. We are doing open captioning now voluntarily. People who attend the theaters can come to our management and say, would you please show a movie this week in open captioning? And every time where we could comply, we do. So I ask, now that we have a very good and productive relationship and dialogue with the advocates, why do we need legislation at this point now? Theater owners know what works, and we want to work with the community to expand it. This bill does not work. This bill will hurt local theaters in communities, and many of them might have to close. We need to talk it out, and we need to find out what works best for both sides. What is proposed in this bill is much more than what the advocates have asked for. And as it was already testified by one of our members, it's impossible. It's impossible to administer. So let's not look upon the theater owners as adversarials. We want to work with the community. We did it with federal law before, and now we think we can do it by agreeing and working with you and finding a good solution. There is no need to legislate. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, I can't quite see all the people who are on the Zoom right now, but if there is one person, one panelist from the movie theater industry who could answer the question that was just raised. It's a critical question. What makes it hard in terms of simply, it's my understanding that it is a switch. You either turn on or to turn off, much like the way for this hearing today. You can press a button to get the captions, or press another button and not see the caption. But it's not difficult to press the button to see the captions. Is there something in the way movies are in the reel or the disc, or however it works these days, technologically, that it makes it difficult to turn on the captions? And maybe look to see if anyone's raised their hand. If they've not, that's fine too. It'll be a question.
Sure. I'd be happy to answer the questions, Raymond Smith again. So the projections today are basically computers. And like all computers, they have capacity limits. So when you have files come in with movies on them, there's multiple files, and these files take up a considerable amount of space. So in some of those files will include an open caption version of the movie. So when you have an auditorium, let's say a facility showing 5 or 6 different features, and they've got the files downloaded in multiple auditoriums, there's limited capacity sometimes, or there's a risk of limited capacity. So absent the open caption show being publicized and scheduled, they're not always going to download that open caption file. So it's not a matter of you just simply say, I want it, turn it on. It has to then be ingested in the system, and this could take some time. And the additional complication of that is a lot of times there's pre-sales on these movies that come out. When these movies are advertised, they're either advertised, if you look on a web page or a third-party page like Fandango, you'll see that the films will feature the international symbols of CC for closed captioning or OC for open captioning. And so when we advertise the films, realize that OC means open caption, or they don't even look. And so that we run into customer issues that become unhappy with the open captions. So what we try to do is make sure it's clearly publicized and advertised. And we got to the point over the years that if you go to like Fandango and you hover your mouse over the symbol next to whether it's closed caption or open caption, a box will pop up. So we've tried to be very informative to the public, both those who need captions and those who desire it or those that don't, that they understand what exactly that CC and OC is. So it isn't simply a matter of plug and play. And there are capacity limitations, and there are ingestion time periods that impact the ability to simply do that. And hopefully that answered your question. If not, I'm more than happy to clarify.
So I really just want to focus on, I'm hoping everyone can hear me. I really am in the middle of a event.
Hearing from other perspectives and other sides.
So really just focusing on the technology, which I think was the first part of your response. What I heard you say was that it takes up more file space, more storage in the system. Compare something with open captions versus something with not. In other words, I'm making this up. One thing is 10 gigabytes and another thing is 15 gigabytes because it has the open caption on it. Is that what I heard you say?
And then in the next battle, I'm in the war room with them. And so it should never, ever have to be.
Okay, I'm sorry. There's somebody talking in the background. I didn't hear you. I didn't hear your question clearly. I'm sorry.
I think if you give her a minute, she's going to get someplace a little quieter.
Gotcha.
Thank you for that. I am going to go someplace quieter. Thank you. Ugh, not quieter. Helicopters. So my question was, I want to focus on the first part of your response, which had to do with the storage required in the system for an open caption movie compared to the other. So in other words, one might be, and I'm making up sizes here because I don't know this, one might be 10 gigabytes and the other is 15 gigabytes. Was that your argument? Okay.
No,
great.
not really.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
no. I wanted to understand what you said. So if I'm not saying it, please.
It's not necessarily that. I'm not talking about just the open capture file. These systems have to take every film that's going to be shown in that auditorium, ingested into the thing. All the trailers get downloaded, ingested in the thing. All the paid programming gets downloaded, ingested. I wish I had a
no, but I think what I'm saying, I think I do understand what you're saying. So let me try saying it again, and perhaps I can articulate it better. Always, when you are running a movie theater, you have to download a lot of things. Trailers, advertisements, movies, a ton of things, right? And that takes up X amount of storage. Now, if you have to have open captions as well, now it's X plus 1 amount of storage. Is that accurate?
Yes, if you have to download the open caption file, that would be one more file.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And you also have to get a set of keys from the distributor. You can't just turn on the open caption file. Each film comes with security protocols that we call keys. And I'm not the biggest techno guy, and then maybe some of the other guys on here are, but they come with what's called a key that allows the theater to initiate the film. Without that key, they could download the file, but they can't actually get the program.
Right. So currently, some of the theaters on their own, without any legislation, are showing both the open caption and the not open caption, right? So they already have in hand the key for the security to allow it to play. Is that accurate?
If they're going to schedule,
and if they needed to show, if they were required to show that movie more than one time in, say, the single day, would they have to get another key or another required sign-off?
No, they just have to get it to be able to make it function. And once they have it, I assume this is more a studio administrative aspect to understand what's being shown and what isn't being shown, as well as to protect against piracy of the product itself.
Of course, every industry is doing everything it can to, of course, obviously. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood. Is there any other component? So it requires more file space, and it requires getting a special somewhere to use the open caption. Those two technical things.
It definitely requires that, and it definitely requires advertising. It definitely requires the theater operators to test the multiple formats. When they download a file, when they ingest it, they do have to run it to make sure, not the whole file, but they run it to make sure it's functioning appropriately. So this just adds one more component to that they have to make sure.
I mean, just like it wasn't functioning well for me to be inside my event versus standing out here, that took extra time, right? Was it worth it? I think so, but okay, I got you. Thank you very much.
No, you're welcome. And again, I believe we believe it's worth it too. It's just a matter of what's the appropriate or the best way to accomplish this objective to enhance the access to our theaters.
Well, that doesn't come across in your testimony, frankly. I hear your words were on the same side, right? I hear your assertions. We don't need laws to do it. I also heard someone say, you know, we negotiated with the federal government on an ADA response. No?
No,
That was
that's
for the closed captions. You negotiated with the federal government to have that.
no,
No?
we didn't. No, what we did is we met with our partners in the deaf and hard of hearing community, and we reviewed what was being proposed by the Department of Justice. And collectively, we put together recommendations from the deaf community. It was a joint accord. It got a lot of press back in 2015, I believe. And from those discussions, we made recommendations to the Department of Justice. Now, at that time,
If you were making recommendations today, and given that we're talking about a percentage of showings, what would your recommendation be?
well, in my experience, and again, I've been doing this for almost 30 years, it isn't that simple. It's not that hard either. What it is it requires some understanding of the needs of the market and coming up with a reasonable.
But you don't know the needs because you don't know the untapped market, right?
Okay, so for example, I'll give you, when I was inside at Regal Entertainment, which I was for 20 years, we had open caption programs across the country without any requests, simply because we understood the market. And I'll give you a good example.
Wait, what business were you in? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear. The what?
I was
what
with Regal Entertainment Group. I
Oh,
was
Regal.
in-house with them for 20 years.
And you always had open captions.
Well, when the studio started providing them, now back in the day, back in the 90s, the open captions were burnt on prints. We didn't have digital. So you had to get the print, and they didn't make enough prints for every theater. So the prints kind of bicycled around. But yes, we've always had them. And we showed them back then when there weren't as many. We did different things. But we focused on areas with high anticipated or known high populations of individuals that were deaf and hard of hearing. For example, Washington, D.C., Rochester, New York, certain areas in California. We always focused in areas where we also knew, because we could look it up, where the deaf and blind schools were, to make sure that we had facilities that were in those.
That was your proxy. Got it.
That would provide this type of access. And it's been a developing thing. I mean, I know today there's people complain about this technology that's out there today. It's not the technology, it's human failures. The technology may not be great, but it is what we worked hard with the community to make sure they were part of the development process. I mean, multiple times in Washington, D.C., we did these demonstrations so they could directly talk to the manufacturers. It was a great process. Now, over time, there's always been some that just want open caption, and we get it. So we're trying to get that to work too. It's just the amount.
Right, because the technology has changed, and it's new world, new technology, new ease of downloading open caption movies, whatever.
There's a lot.
Okay, I'm really trying to understand the point of view, but I feel I'm not quite sure. And again, I apologize. There's another helicopter going over my head, so I apologize. That's right. You can't hear.
No, I can't hear the helicopter. You're okay.
Oh, you can't hear the helicopter. Okay, good. Great. So my question is, what's your answer to Svetlana when she was talking about all the things that she missed out on her life? What's your answer to the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, just like her, the people who may not live near a deaf and blind school?
Well, again, my answer to her is these out there. If you make a request for an open caption show, almost all of them I know of have that program. Or if you want a dedicated opportunity to have it at a particular facility, it's just a matter of dialogue. I mean, I know.
So somebody has to know to be able to ask, right? They need to know that there's an option out there.
Okay, I've been doing this a long time, and I still run into people today that don't know there's personal captioning technologies. This is notwithstanding the fact that we work directly with the largest deaf and hard of hearing
I know.
in the country to get that word out. It still happens. And I'm going to say this to you. What you need to understand, and everyone should, is that you can't look at the deaf and hard of hearing community as any different than any other segment of our society. Not everybody goes to the movies. And I used to say this all the time. It's like the field of dreams argument. If you build it, they will come. Well, that's not true. I'm not going to come see a slasher movie that has open captions simply because it has open captions. I'm going to go see the movies I want to see. And as a consequence of that, it isn't necessarily going to drive the attendance that they like to understand. I'm an advocate, and I don't put this up, but I'm also the parent of a deaf child. I've experienced it personally for over 30 years. I know exactly what it is. I've utilized all of these technologies. And as they were developed, are they the best they could be today? Maybe not, but they were the best that could be at the time. Do all theaters and all theater personnel manage that equipment effectively? They can't. And they can do a much better job. And that's what leads to these failures. When I was at Regal, what we did is we put our policy trailer, it started before the previews, was captioned. So that anybody that had the technology, was glasses or the seat mounts or neck loops, which Regal had all three, could be able to go in there and know that their devices were functioning appropriately well before, sometimes 15, 20 minutes before the feature movie ever started. Because notwithstanding their best efforts, sometimes the devices in the auditorium, particularly the infrared ones, they just weaken and die over time. The Wi-Fi ones just stop, and it's very difficult to catch those. And you have a combination of all those things in theaters today. So I understand, I respect everybody's opinion here. I respect the way they feel. I respect their desires. And I think the industry, at least my involvement, and for 30 years, I've been a leader with them in trying to work and increase and enhance access. That is still the desire. Things have changed over time. Maybe we need more open caption than what's being provided, but it isn't a one size fits all solution. It just doesn't work. So that's all I would suggest. And we are actively talking with advocates, and we are actively doing pilots now at various areas in the country to try and find a way to give some specific guidance to our members. You know, you got big members that have more tools than little guys. Sorry.
Yep. Nope. I appreciate that very much. I appreciate your answer. Your child is very lucky to have you as a parent. I still can't get a cochlear implant for several of the people who live in my public housing, in my development, in my district. I can't get them anything because it's not available. They can't afford it. They don't have access. No one's paying attention to them. So look, people are in all different types of situations, and the role of government is to try to help those, often to help everyone. Including business, industry, and people most in need. So I appreciate that. I actually am at an event, so I want to apologize in advance to the remaining people who are going to testify. A, sorry I made you wait so long, and B, I might get shut down because my phone is losing battery. But I will read everyone's testimony. I appreciate everyone for being on here today. And thank you, Sergeants and Chair Eugene, for giving me an opportunity to ask questions. Thank you.
Well, hello, Chair Eugene and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Amanda Perez. I'm the General Manager at the AMC Kips Bay 15 movie theater location. As you may be aware, AMC and the movie theater industry in New York City are still in the process of recovering from the most challenging times in modern history. Movie theaters in New York City were closed for 50 weeks during the COVID-19 pandemic. And once our theaters were allowed to reopen, we were limited by capacity restrictions that remained in place until almost June of this year. To state the obvious, AMC's in New York City theaters earned no income during this 12-month period and were still in the beginning steps of the process of returning to pre-pandemic numbers. Despite the challenges we face as an industry, AMC has taken substantial steps to provide an open caption showing in our greater New York City market. Currently, 16 of AMC theaters in the greater New York City market participate in our open caption national program. From October 1st to November 11th of this year, our 16 locations had 914 open caption shows. These 914 open caption shows average about 12 guests per show, which is approximately 5.8% of occupancy, leaving 94.8% of the seats for these showings unsold. Additionally, 122 of these 914 showtimes sold 0 tickets. 266 of the 914 showtimes sold 1 to 5 tickets, and none of these 914 showtimes sold out. AMC's New York City theaters look forward to continue our work with the open and hard of hearing community to respond to the demand of open caption showings. However, we feel that the INT 2020, by creating an arbitrary 50% requirement for open caption showings, jeopardizes the recovery of the movie theater industry in one of the most important markets in the country. Thank you again for your time and the opportunity to testify today.
I'll just be brief. Listen, I know what we've done. I know what I did. And I've been doing it since the 90s. Now, I certainly can't sit here and say I've dealt with every deaf organization or hard of hearing organization in the United States, because I haven't. I don't know all of them. There were 2 referenced today I had never heard of. But I have been associated with the since 1990, I believe. And I have been involved in creating and enhancing access since then. If you spoke with individuals that were part of the Coalition for Movie Captioning back in the 90s, or you spoke with individuals that are associated with certain deaf schools in this country, including Tennessee School for the Deaf, they can certainly confirm it. The litigation with John Waldo did not do what it did. That litigation, and the only reason Regal was in that litigation, because, and listen, I respect John. We go back a long way. We don't always agree, but I respect him. And he wanted us to do something in that litigation, which we were already doing. And we told him we're already going to be rolling this out, but he wanted a firm date to roll out this new technology. We couldn't give it to him because we were at the whim of the manufacturer. So he did sue Regal. And then his claims ultimately got dismissed because it became moot. His claim that we were violating the ADA because we didn't have time to file the suit were not deemed moot, but his claims that we have to install the technology, which is today the complaints are about, was already moot because we did install the technology before the case went to trial. Now, as far as all the rest of it, we've been doing it for years. These companies can probably go back and establish when they started these programs. I'm not going to dispute that when this legislation started in New York, that the activists or whatever the industry didn't reach out to try to find the activists to be able to start having dialogue in that locality. It's certainly not a new subject, and I'll leave it there because Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you, though, for the response.
But I still have some few questions for the industry. Are they still there? The representative? Okay. Anyone can answer, but what I would like to know, if they can tell us, are our movies with open caption currently shown in New York City? Anyone can answer that?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Are our movies with open captions currently shown in New York City?
Yes, absolutely.
Could you give us some detail about, the procedure?
I would like to give you specific details, and I would like to see who else from the circuits is currently on right now, because they can tell you right now, their specific show times and playlists. I'm just clicking through the Zoom here to see who else might be on. But I know that they vary. I know that AMC has a pilot running in New York City at 3 of their theaters, 2 on the Upper West Side, 1 in Times Square. And they're offering a number, and I will look up the data right now because I have the data here if no one else is available to provide it. But they're also offered available upon request. And the issue, Mr. Chairman, with this legislation, again, is the quantity of open captioning shows and the ability to play the number that's set in this bill is just impossible to comply with, and would lead to further financial loss. And again, you've heard a lot of testimony about the difficulty of the theaters. I want to again reiterate some of the testimony. We want people in our theaters, and we clearly want to welcome people with disabilities, including people who are deaf and hard of hearing. And, you know, I personally had conversations with Mr. Bergman and Mr. Waldo, and they've been very productive conversations and very respectful conversations, and we hope to continue those conversations. And we want to be able to find a solution that works for everybody. I just don't think that this legislation does. And I think it will only lead to the detriment of all the stakeholders, because these theaters won't be able to stay in business if this legislation is put in as is. And a mandate like this just won't work. So we're trying to find a way of expanding open captioning, a way of improving closed captioning. We need as many people to come to the theaters as possible. And if there's an untapped audience that's out there, we welcome them with open arms, everybody, and want everybody to feel respected, welcomed, and valued. And that's critically important. And I'm just finding the data here, so I appreciate your time. The number of open caption movies, sir, Mr. Chairman, I have 6,093 open caption showtimes from one of the cinema chains. And the other number here, just bear with me, please. In New York City, one of them is offering 914 open caption showtimes. And again, the data we have is that the audience is not turning out for them. Could they do a better job of advertising them? We're trying to talk with Mr. Bergman and Mr. Waldo about doing just that. Could we do a better job of figuring out, you know, the feedback from all audiences, from people who are deaf and hard of hearing, from people who are not, what they like, what they don't like, of course. But all these things take a little bit of time. They take a little bit of time to set up the proper methodology. They take a little bit of time to determine the right data and the right facts. And unfortunately, you know, we look at this legislation, I you know, with all due respect, look at that 50% number. I think it's quite arbitrary and again, unworkable. And we have a subset of New York City data right now that's very actionable. And all it shows is that the capacity is not, the auditoriums are not filled. They're almost completely empty, 95, 94% empty. And if there's an untapped audience, if there's an aggregate increase in the audience, that would be something the theaters would welcome. Again, the theaters want people to come to the movies and not give people a reason to stay home. So we want to continue to work with the advocates. We want to work with all advocates. And have dialogue to figure something out that works. Our fear is that this legislation does not work and will only compound the financial problems facing the theaters.
Thank you. You know, based on your statement, it seems that the number of captions represent a big challenge for the industry. Is that correct? Hello? Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just had some trouble unmuting. Yes, sir. Yeah, yes, Mr. Chairman. The issue is if the number of captions is set in stone, if it is mandated, and the demand is not there, then you will have movies being forced to be played to empty auditoriums. And the problem with that is you will no longer have movie theaters if they are required to play films with no audiences. I defer to the theater managers, I defer to the theater owners who know this issue inside and out. But the experience that I've looked at in terms of the data and that I've heard is that when the audience isn't coming, the theaters aren't making revenue, they can no longer afford to do that. And there are the technical challenges and the logistical challenges of such a high percentage. And I think that if we look at other jurisdictions who have open caption showtimes that are really responsive to the demand, that it works well. And unfortunately, a rigid mandate that is set in stone with a number that's arbitrary will not work well. And so we're trying to find what that number will be. And that's why there are pilot projects. And that's why there is data. And this decision and this discussion should be data driven. It should be assessing the New York market and trying to find a solution that works for New York City, which is unlike every other market in the country. So we're trying to find the right solution. We're, as someone said earlier, we're not the bad guys. We want people to come to the movies, and we particularly want the deaf and hard of hearing community to feel welcome and an integral part of the audience at the movies.
Thank you very much for your answer. Thank you. You know, if the bill gets enacted, it will require also movie theater to advertise their availability of movies with open captioning. Is there any other challenge that you believe that will impose to the company?
No, Mr. Chairman. The advertising portion is one that we want to really work with the advocates to determine what is the best verbiage, if you will, to advertise. In some of our conversations, we've been told that it should be consistent to say either OC or open captioning. There have been experiments to try to really clarify what that might mean for some audiences who are not familiar with OC or open captioning. And so sometimes it will say provided with or offered with English subtitles. The idea is that all audiences should be able to clearly understand how the movie is being offered. And this goes beyond just open caption or closed captioning. People want to go see a movie in IMAX. They need to know that it's playing in IMAX. They need to know that that theater and that screen has the IMAX availability or other availabilities, other types of projection equipment or other types of technology. And so we're trying to figure out what is the best fit. And again, want to work with the advocates to determine both the advertising, but most especially the quantity. And I'll be the first to say, you know, people should feel free to come to the movie theater and have the accessibility to see the show that they want when they want to. We're not seeing that that is the case. And these businesses are trying to accommodate everyone. And so we're trying to find that right balance. And unfortunately, this legislation does not find that right balance at all. And we're reluctantly opposing it. Again, we want people from the deaf and hard of hearing community to be regular patrons at the movies.
You mentioned that you, from the industry, you are not the enemies. And you do want the people to enjoy the movies. And you are willing to dialogue, to continue the conversation with the advocates. But you you heard also the other speakers, they share with us the difficulties, the challenges that they used to face in terms of equipment, device that would help them to enjoy the movies. And we know that everyone in New York City, all New Yorkers and all our constituents, they have the right to enjoy what is available in our great city of New York. This is a question of justice, as you know. And I think we as a society, we have to provide them with the opportunity to enjoy every good thing that we, all the citizens are enjoying in New York City. But knowing these issues or challenges that some people with disability, have been facing, what would be your advice, or what would be your thought to try to accommodate them now, or to try to respond to their problem, or the problem that they are faced, when they go to the movies, in terms of, being able to understand, what is being said in the movie? What is the urgent solutions or proposition you would have to resolve the problem right now?
Yes, absolutely. And it's a great question, Mr. Chairman. I think it goes at the heart of this very issue. We're trying to assess what is the right solution. And to do so, we need actionable data. And we are currently operating in multiple theaters a pilot project to see what works. We need to find out the right questions to ask, and we need to find out the right methodology to determine what is that right data. As Mr. Waldo has pointed out, in some jurisdictions, he's looked at the aggregate data. In other words, if you have low open caption turnout, are those other theater goers, those patrons, going to a non-open caption show? And then in the net, are you seeing a gain? Unfortunately, the experience, and maybe more anecdotal than data, but the experience has seen that if you have a patron going to a movie on a Friday night and they don't like that it's open caption, they don't come back. Or maybe they don't come back the following Friday or following Saturday. And so we want to be able to determine that customer behavior for people who do like open captioning, and customer behavior for people who do not like open captioning. Unfortunately, the data right now that is currently being assessed in New York City is showing that there is a large number of empty seats, almost 95% of empty seats in the theaters for open caption showtimes. We don't want to see that. Let me just be very, very clear. We would love to have sellouts of open caption seats. And if that's the case, we would have more open captioning. We want this to be market driven. We understand the role of government. We work very closely with government, and most recently worked to promote vaccination across the city in our theaters and outside of our theaters as a way to make sure that we don't have to close down again. And being closed for a year, I can tell you, was extremely difficult. And I know it's extremely frustrating for people from the deaf and hard of hearing community to not be able to go to any movie that they want to see, or to have difficulties with the closed captioning equipment. We've talked with advocates about ways to both improve the closed captioning experience, possibly using new technology, and also ensuring that the devices are fully charged and, of course, hygienic. But we want to make sure that the open captioning availability is a fair and balanced approach for everyone, for all patrons. And there are, unfortunately, patrons who complain about open captioning. There are patrons who don't like it, and the theaters need to be able to respond to their patrons. And that's why we want to be able to continue with the pilot. We want to be able to continue talking with the advocates, and we want to find that right balance. We're very willing to be dynamic and flexible. If we see that there are more people coming to the open caption shows, the theaters would offer more open caption shows. It's a good problem to have when you have a large population or a large segment of the audience that wants to come. And that's something that the theaters definitely want to see. Unfortunately, they just haven't, since this pandemic started and since the theaters have been able to reopen, the audience numbers are dismal. The box office receipts, which are, reported publicly, but they're reported for the whole country and all movie theaters, not just New York City, the numbers may seem staggering, and it may seem like, oh, these movies are making so much money. They're not. And if you do the math, and we have the numbers in our testimony, it's quite dismal. And unfortunately, a lot of the audience is choosing to stay home, and we would love for the audience to come to the movies. And I can't say it or emphasize it enough. We want people who are deaf and hard of hearing to come to the movies, to feel comfortable, to feel welcome, to feel important, and come see the movies they want. And as Randy Smith mentioned, there's no monolithic audience. All the different genres of movies are available to everybody, and there's no one type of movie that any particular type of audience wants to see. So again, we want to work with the sponsors. We want to work with the advocates. We want to find the right solution. This bill is not the right solution. And we think that we can come up with something voluntary that would work much better and enable all people to be able to feel comfortable and come to the movies.
Thank you very much for your answer. Thank you.